All right, good day, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of the Learning and Leadership webinar series with PeopleFluent. It's great to see many of you attend today. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes to wait for some last-minute attendees, and we'll be starting at the top of the hour. So again, thank you for your patience. Good day, all, and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Transformation and the Evolution of Learning. My name is Leroy Lassenberg. I'm the Product Marketing Manager for PeopleFluent Learning Solutions, and I'll be facilitating our discussion today. A little bit about Yes, sorry for the technical difficulties. A little bit about PeopleFluent. PeopleFluent is one of the leading software vendors that provides best-of-breed talent management software and learning solutions that help you realize the full value of your workforce. Deployed separately or as an integrated solution, our software spans talent acquisition, performance, compensation, succession, organizational charting, learning, and development. PeopleFluent is also part of the Learning Technologies Group family, a market leader in the workplace digital learning and talent management market. Now today, we are joined by Jeff Fissel, VP of Solutions, and Dawn Barron, Product Marketing Manager at Instilled. A little about Instilled. Instilled is the corporate learning experience platform that supports a modern learning culture. It's the simplest way to capture, catalog, and discover organizational knowledge at scale. To learn more about Instilled, visit the website at www.instilled.com. Now, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so we know how to participate in today's webinar. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane on your control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect those and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We will also be holding poll questions intermittently, which you can respond to when prompted by selecting the appropriate response and clicking submit. So without further ado, let's get started. I'd like to again introduce our first question of the topic today, Jeff and Dawn. With the advent of digital content, social influence, and mobile technology, how is employee learning evolving?
Well, thanks, Leroy, and welcome to everyone who is on the webcast today. Jeff and I have been working together for a long time, and we enjoy having these types of discussions, but we want to make sure that you are also involved in the presentation today. So as Leroy said, make sure you ask questions or just provide comments based on what Jeff and I are talking about, because the more you provide, the more enriched we have in the presentation today. And that's what we're going to be talking about how everyone in the organization can contribute to learning and how that makes the learning experience that much more powerful. But specifically to address the question that Leroy just posed, we have seen a massive change over the past 20 years in corporate learning. 20 years ago, I was working with the Association for Talent Development, which at the time was the Association for Training and Development. And we were always talking about instructor-led classroom training and what does that look like and how can you make that experience better. But very quickly, with the advent of technology, we started to shift to e-learning, and there are so many benefits to e-learning, whether it's from a resource perspective with spending less time traveling or spending less time investing in the on-site experience. There were many benefits to it, but then we also felt like we were losing the collaboration component. So we started moving into more of a blended learning experience. And then shortly after, we all started to pick up what we now feel like is attached to our hand, our smartphone, and mobile learning became a reality. And we use it so much these days that everything is considered mobile first if it's going to be relevant to the day-to-day learning of an employee. And now, there's the whole idea of how we coordinate, collaborate with each other. We've always called it social learning, and it's still a very real thing, social or informal learning. And how does technology help to enable that? We have so much at our fingertips these days in terms of how we do our day-to-day activities and what we expect from technology, whether it's buying something from Amazon or finding a how-to on YouTube. All of these things have become so familiar to us, so expected, that now the expectation on corporate learning has started to change. And Jeff and I have had the opportunity to work with many companies, global companies, very large companies who are working with us to figure out how they can embrace technology in order to bring a more normal experience to the employee when it comes to learning. And Jeff, if I can welcome you into this discussion based on that, just to talk a little bit about our history and what we've seen in terms of where video has come from as it's been impacting the way corporate learning has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dawn, and thank you everyone for attending today. So as Dawn, I'll echo the thing Dawn already said is please interact, ask questions, call Dawn and I out if you don't agree with us. We welcome the dialogue around this, and this is something that's evolving every time we give a presentation like this. So to Dawn's question about sort of video, is when Dawn and I started working together when she was at ATD around video, video was much more of a postage stamp size thing on the internet. YouTube was just coming out. It was grainy, blurry, and didn't have any productivity orientation to it at all. It was a place where people uploaded kind of crazy videos that were there. And watching that kind of grow and evolve has really kind of changed the way our product is and how our customers are sort of using that. One of the things Dawn will talk about and we'll jump into is this kind of creator-centric mindset of how people want to be able to start to create and digest content like that. But then even before we get to that part of it, I think it's part of how people want to discover content. Dawn, I think it was a webinar or something we did of someone said, no one ever says I want to LMS that, or I wanted to go to my LMS to find out how to do something. And that was kind of like a really simple way of thinking about it. You're right. I don't ever go to the corporate LMS or even the internet in a lot of cases to look up how to do something in the company. I go look on YouTube or Google for it first. And that's kind of the behavior that we're seeing that's driving a lot of this new technology of how people want to learn or consume content.
Right. And a lot of these behaviors, while they're so familiar to us right now, and they've evolved over time. And we've seen with video, it was a medium that we were so familiar with and that we like to use because we worked with it every day. But when we started to introduce the concept to the corporate enterprise when it came to learning, we really saw how afraid people were to put themselves on video and to use it as a regular medium. And so none of this happens, overnight. It's more of a progression. And in a webinar that Jeff and I recently delivered, we were talking about how the cartoon The Jetsons was showing the video chat way back when, and we all thought that that was so futuristic. And it's here now, but it was not an overnight activity. It's been a long time since we were young when we watched The Jetsons. So it's something that we want to say it's happening and we have to adjust to it. But there needs to be a journey set up as to how we take what's going on with technology, how we take social influence, how we take the ability to use your smartphone and really incorporate it smartly into our learning programs. And one way that we can start thinking about this is to identify the points with which our employees first interact with any type of learning within our organizations, any type of training within our organizations. And so with that, we have a poll coming up, and we just want to get a feel from the audience to see where it is that learning starts inside of your organizations. So Harley, if you can push that poll out. Great, thank you. So we encourage you all to answer this poll just so that we can get an idea of where you think employee learning starts inside of your organizations. And keep in mind, it's real easy to say, oh, it starts as soon as somebody is hired. But also remember that new information is constantly being delivered in your organization. So we don't always have the opportunity to begin with a hire date. We have to teach people progressively throughout their tenure with a company. And so there are many touch points. So let's see what we're seeing overall. Okay, and it looks like it's at onboarding. Now, again, like I just said, that's very typical, that's where people get that first touch point. So think about that in terms of how you want to welcome new people into your organization with an experience that will set the tone for how they can expect to learn within your organization, how they want to learn with each other, and what some of those learning outcomes may be as they work through their new job and their new roles and responsibilities.
Yeah,
okay,
Dawn, I just read an article recently about how important that first day is to setting the culture and tone for employees. I think it was in an article that was written by Ben Horowitz, a venture guy, but he was talking a lot about company culture. And he's like, so many companies dump people into onboarding, which is just a nightmare of next, really awful experiences that set the wrong tone for the culture of the company and how they want people to react. And that still hasn't really changed much, which was just a really interesting thing of everyone talks so much about culture and values and all of these other things. But then the first thing you have someone do in a company is go through a piece of content that they have to spend 4 hours doing on a desktop that's not even mobile accessible. So it's just interesting how those things align.
Yeah, or like filling out forms. Like, we get it. We all have to do these things when we start a new job, but we really need to step back and think about what the experience is like for that new person and how they're learning and what tone that's setting. Actually, if we can move to the next slide, one of the next topics that we're looking to talk about is is engagement. And how do we even define engagement? Just like Jeff was saying, like, what's the culture that we're looking to set? Do we even know? So then when we're starting to bring new people or existing employees into new discussions or new information, how are we going to measure engagement? How are we even defining what engagement looks like? And it may be different from company to company. Some companies that we've worked with look at engagement as more of a culture. How is our culture recognizing learning? How are they appreciating learning? And that type of culture shift may be a pretty difficult undertaking if you find that your culture is not necessarily pro learning, but to get them there and then to see the differences is pretty amazing. But then in other companies, they're looking at engagement as course completion. So there's a big spectrum there of how we consider what a learning program should be measured in terms of engagement. And Jeff, if there, in regard to our experience with video, we've always come into the level of engagement of our customers who have said, well, we put these videos out there, but who's watching them? How do we know that they're watching them? What are we doing to make sure that they watch them? Can you talk a little bit about some of the experiences that we've seen in terms of engaging people through relatively new medium like video?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two parts that you hit there. There's the tracking component and taking advantage of technology that's going to show you a heat map of engagement within your video content. Because we all know there's still lots of hour-long recorded GoToMeeting sessions like this right now that will end up as a video within an organization and probably within our organization as well. But looking at those analytics and seeing the areas of interest in there and then using that to develop content afterwards becomes a really powerful thing to do. But then also mixing and matching the different modalities and content types together. So we see customers that are we joke about scraping the tape off the webcam, but recording like a quick little 15-second intro to say, hey, person or new employee that's taking this is why this is important to our company and our role. I know it's not going to be the most engaging content, but it's important for these 3 reasons. And we've all done it, and we appreciate that you're about to do it, and we welcome your feedback through that. So it's the same piece of content, but it's changing the person's experience through it dramatically just by a 15-second little intro piece of content explaining that.
Right, and we've seen companies start to experience a culture shift because they've done that. And not only because they've done that with things that we dread, like compliance training. They put their face on a video, explain why it's important, explain why this content is going to change the way the company works or the way they perform. And all of a sudden, there is more of a connection between the learner and the company and the executive, because they feel like there's a vested interest in making sure that happens. So it only takes a few seconds, and yet it makes such an impact. And that leads us to something else that Jeff and I have been exploring a lot lately and reading about in terms of different research that's out there, mostly from futurists, not necessarily from the learning community, but how so much of technology is lending itself to creation and allowing for the individual who has the app or goes to the website to be able to create their own piece of content or enrich existing content. And so we've really been considering that and wondering how we can incorporate that more and more often into the learning experience. We've seen the phrase creator-centric, which we thought was really interesting because in general, businesses are changing their perspectives. Where a hospital may have been concerned with XYZ 20 years ago, now they're very concerned with the patient, not just the patient, but also the patient's families. So there's a shift in terms of who they're serving. Or in organizations, I've seen CEOs now talking about that they're employee-centric because they know if they're feeding the employee best, then that employee has a better reason to serve the customer better. So there's just a different shift in how we are focusing these types of efforts. And if we change our learning and think more about how individuals within the organization can help to create and enrich learning, then there's more of a vested interest into making sure that learning becomes part of the fabric of the organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Don. It is exciting to see what that happens and the trust that has to come with that within the organization. Because when you enable your employees and people joining the team to create, it's an implied trust that they're going to create something good. And that doesn't mean you have to push it out to the entire 100,000 person organization, but letting people create does kind of set a cultural value for your organization that you trust the people that are there, and you're going to help them develop and be able to create more and better content over time.
All right. And Jeff, if you could talk a little bit about, over the past 20 or so years that we've been working with video, one of the features that we've had with video is to allow people to comment on those videos. And many of the companies that we worked with were concerned about opening that up, right? Because they were like, well, what if someone says this? Or what if someone creates and posts something that's inappropriate? And in your experience, that didn't happen. People almost police themselves because they want to show up right inside of their organization.
Yeah, absolutely. We even had to the point of that years ago when we had the video platform. We actually had this like really intense approval queue process for videos or comments and things that were added, where they got routed through legal and all these different things depending what it was. And we saw all that did was actually just discourage people from creating content, whether that content was just a comment or new pieces of content to contribute to it. And that whole like people are going to post awful things doesn't really actually happen. It's just like people saying awful things in the elevator in the office or sending an awful email out to colleagues. Like, I don't think those things happen. And for some reason, there's this fear that people are going to do that with learning content, which I think doesn't ever really happen. And you can use technology to control a lot of that. Today, people use auto speech to text to evaluate words. So if there's profanity or sensitive things in content, that it gets flagged, and that doesn't happen. And that person's made aware that happened. You don't need to involve people to like stifle the creativity and to start to break down some of those barriers to allow it. It's something that we've seen with organizations like Johnson Control. Just did a case study on that. What was it, Don? 80% of the content that they're pushing out now is created by subject matter experts in the field. I love statistics like that.
Right. And they provide such a great example of a best practice that we've shared with others that we meet through webinar and trade show. What they did in order to feel more comfortable about opening up the doors to letting employees create was to create a sandbox. And that sandbox was monitored frequently, but it allowed for anyone to post anything they thought was relevant to the sandbox first, and then it was pushed forward by the moderators, so that it eliminated the idea that anything can go public, but it also gave people a place to put their thoughts. And whether or not, that thought was going to be elevated to a more public level, that was up to the moderators, but it at least let people be creators and share their ideas. videos. And we've told that we've given that idea to many of our customers and prospects who are looking at using video or video type technology. Create the sandbox, let people play around, let people have the opportunity to create. They're only going to want to do better. They're only going to want to improve. We have a great question that I haven't seen before, and while I don't know the scientific answer behind it, I do want to address it. But we have a question about, we were saying earlier that by appending a short video from an executive or some employee, a human face, to an existing piece of e-learning, that it increases the engagement rate because people feel like they're more connected to the purpose. So then we have a question, does a recurring character have the same or similar impact as putting a face to training? And again, well, I don't know the science behind that. I have been working in marketing for a long time, and I would just want to give that kind of perspective. So I think if you were looking to put a reoccurring character, it creates personality, it creates theme, it's sort of like a logo, it's an icon, it attaches people to the effort. But I don't think it can replace the value of actually seeing someone's face on video. Jeff and I are always on video chat. It's how we talk to each other. You almost can't get around the reaction. You get to see people, you get to see their face, you get to see how much they get excited about what it is they're saying. And when you can feel that energy, it changes how you approach the work that's being set forth. So I feel like, and again, this is just my perspective, Jeff, I'll let you weigh in, but I feel like seeing the human face and seeing someone discuss the work in front with their level of energy, with their passion, with their perspective, is going to give a different outcome than having a reoccurring character or icon. And that's helpful because it gives personality and theme to the effort, but it's not the same.
I would agree, and I think seeing different faces helps that as well. And people, maybe not necessarily the CEO, but a peer within the company or a new employee, asking them to record a quick little piece of content about it. I think getting the variety of faces, personality, and things, because you never know what people are going to relate to or who they're going to relate to. So getting more of that out there, I think, is very important. There's another kind of follow-up question, Dawn, of like, so when employees create content, how are brand standards being controlled as well as formatting? I think there's a couple elements to that tie into a little bit of the fear that we talked about of not trusting the employees to create good content, but you can use technology to enforce some of that, where the styling, all of those sort of things that are there. But I will say a webcam video is gonna be informal. There's gonna be ums and ahs. There might be something weird that if they work from home, that's behind them. I think there's some of that stuff that people are getting more comfortable with, and it's expected. And I actually would argue that it adds to even a more human element of it than a studio produced piece of content, that something that has that natural feel to it helps build that connection in even a stronger way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been something that we've seen over time, that it just really allows for the connection that we feel like as we transitioned from in-classroom learning to e-learning, that we lost. We don't get to see each other anymore. Furthermore, with e-learning, with blended learning, with multitasking, and with a remote workforce, we also run the risk of not being able to make eye contact and multitasking while we're having these types of conversations with other people. So it's something that we always feel like if you do have the opportunity to talk to someone over video and really make that eye contact, that's going to make a big difference.
Absolutely. And one thing that I will mention really quickly is that doing this in a trusted and secured environment is really important. Like, you don't want to make people put them in a vulnerable situation of creating content where something that all 100,000 people in the company are going to see that right away, or that it could end up on a public website or something like that. So making sure you provide a safe environment to do that becomes really important too.
Absolutely. And Jeff, we got a question you probably saw from Eric about why they're not seeing us right now. And I love that you asked that question, because Jeff and I are always on video, and we always encourage people to turn our videos on. And right before this session, we were like, okay, we'll turn our videos on. We were totally fine with that because we do it all the time. But we were trying to think, we're like, what does the value? Is it distracting for us to be, like, Jeff's in the office in Nashville, I work remotely, so I'm out of my house in Virginia. But when we talk to each other, we do it all the time. And today, we can absolutely do it. I know that might throw off our webinar team if all of a sudden we change technology, but we're happy to do it. And in fact, here, let's see. Are you already doing? Okay, so let me turn mine on.
I knew it was only a matter of time before we did get called out on it.
Yeah, we like doing this. In fact, like we ran a webinar a few weeks ago, and we challenged everyone who was on the webinar. We had almost 200 people. Everyone, if by the end we could get half of the people to turn on their webinars with their webcams so that they could actually realize what we were talking about and the power of it. And they started to do it. Even if they weren't paying attention, they turned it on, and then they would just give a wave. And that's what's so important about this type of communication and kind of living what we're talking about. So thank you, Eric, for the prompt. We're happy to do it. And welcome to my house. And you can welcome to Nashville, Jeff.
Absolutely. My boring white wall here. Sorry about that.
I have a fan, but otherwise white walls as well. Okay, so then just to move this along, we were talking about that we like to go back to the premise of this particular topic area. It was about engagement, and engagement can be measured in so many different ways. There's also, different definitions of engagement, but we have so many different types of media at our fingertips right now. So we wanted to get an idea from all of you out there. What do you see is working in terms of engaging effectively your employees when it comes to different modalities of learning, different media when it comes to learning? So if you could take a look at those responses. But then also, I don't want to limit you and your ideas to these 5 responses. There are so many different ways that we learn, and so many different ways that others are learning. So please feel free in the comment area to add additional responses. I mean, I'm amazed on a daily basis when my kids come home from school and talk about how they learned something today. It helps me in my job when I think about, if this is how my kid is learning in 4th grade, then how is he going to want to learn when he enters the workforce? And I think any of you who have kids think about that all the time. We're learning from them just as much as they're learning from us. Okay, poll is in. Oh, interesting. I did not think this was going to be the case, but I'm glad it is.
Always like being surprised.
Right. I can't remember what it was that we did the other day that we were, was it about the, this is actually a good thing to talk about right now. Jeff and I, one of the things we strive for in providing a great learning experience is to make it as easy as we possibly can and to make it feel like we live. If I'm going to buy something from Amazon, I expect to get it by tomorrow. So why is it when I look for a learning experience or want a learning course, I'm searching and then maybe I found it and then I have to register for it. So it's not going to be until next week that I get the content. That's not the way that we want to learn. So we posted a poll and we said, how many clicks away is your next learning experiences? Because we feel like it should be within 2 clicks. And then we started to see 10, 20. And we're thinking, who is going to stay engaged if they have to click around 10 plus times in order to get to the information that they need now? So that's just a mindset that we have to start assuming when we make learning decisions. How can we make this as easy as possible for people? Okay, so can we post those results?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so classroom training. I know I can't expect all of you to respond to this, but I wonder, even though you're saying classroom training is most effective, I also wonder how many of you in your organizations are seriously contemplating moving away from classroom training because of cost, because of travel. I don't know if you can, I'd love to see comments here, because if we're saying it's the most effective, I can guarantee you during budget season, everyone has been challenged with, but it's costly. So what else are we going to do? What other platforms are we going to look at in order to make learning more scalable? So if you all want to comment on that, those comments can come in as we can continue to chat. But I have to imagine that around this time of year especially, we're looking to scale our learning. We're looking to do more with our learning budget, and classroom learning does have its limitations. Okay.
Dawn, there was a comment in there about like classroom has that peer-to-peer element to it, that the connection that happens where online's typically lost. Do you want to talk a little bit about how different technologies you're seeing are kind of changing that? And actually people sometimes are even more comfortable with I'll drop a consumer app, the TikTok-like apps, to be able to actually communicate more like that than they would even in person.
Yeah, so there's a variety of different technologies that are out there to try to copy or capture the collaboration that we see inside of a classroom. Anywhere from creating cohorts with learning so that you're with a team and you're virtually working with each other. Some, I know there are a few large blended learning courses out there where you do start with an in-person training and then you continue the experience with virtual. But then we lean more toward the more advanced creator-centric apps that we were talking about. Jeff just referenced TikTok. One of the reasons why TikTok is considered, hey, watch this because it may be something that we need to consider, is because of all of the functionality that it provides you to be a creator. So I can not only, I can be sharing, I can be following, I can be commenting, I'm creating, I am enhancing, I'm unlocking this talent that I have inside of me that I can all of a sudden share with the whole wide world. And for those of you who don't know what TikTok is, it's a music app. It's you find a song, I can sing the song, I can create a music video, and then I can also join some of my friends who are doing the same song, and we can merge things. And so you're just creating a mini movie. Back to our MTV days when we all watched videos, like that's what these kids are doing now with it. But what it's really doing, the power behind it, it's letting them be artists. It's letting them be creators. And if this is how they're doing things in their downtime and how they're learning from other people and how they're willing to share with other people, I can't imagine that's going to stop as they move into the workforce. It's definitely something we need to be considering.
Yep, absolutely. And I think there is one more poll coming up, but one other thing I'll say is that like, I don't want this to come across as bashing in-person or live training. I think there's always going to be an element for it, and there is some effective use of it, but making the most of that time becomes really important. And a lot of the lecture components of it, back to our kind of flipped classroom or flipped learning from many years ago mindset, can be made a lot more efficient, so you can optimize the collaboration and then have the leave behind be the content that's created there as well. So right. I think there is still a situation where both are valuable to organizations.
Yeah, and another thing, just to like close out this thought, is so much of what we've done with video, or that we talk about with the video platform that we work with, is that you can constantly enrich it. You can append new content to it. You can make it as part of a playlist. You can make a comment on it. All of that stuff is then preserved in that original video, which makes it enriched for the next person. And that level of contribution and a living piece of learning that will always benefit from the next person's experience is really what we're all after. Like, we want these things to grow. We want these things to be enhanced so that the next person who goes in can learn from the last person who experienced or used that content. Absolutely.
All right, I think we have this other poll here. Do we want to push this one about how people are consuming content?
Yep.
Or where? On which devices? Or where physically?
And we realize that it's all of the above, but we're just looking for your opinion on the most used. Okay, I'm also surprised here. It makes sense because I'm a remote worker and I have been for a long, long time. So I've become so dependent on my mobile devices in order to access information and to learn from. And at the same time, you look at other types of workers who are in an office, and that's where they're learning that on their desktop. So, or going to classroom training. So it definitely makes sense. But what it also brings to life is how we have to provide for all, because there is no longer just the office worker or just the remote worker. In fact, we're dealing with this gig economy that doesn't want to work for any one employer at all. They're all over the place. And so we really have to be considering how we can push out learning scalably, but so that it reaches everyone where they are. Okay, if we can push those results out. Jeff, what do you think about that?
It actually doesn't surprise me as that much. I think it's a snapshot of kind of where the reality is now. A lot of what we're talking about is a little future leaning and oriented, which is the part of one of the reasons of doing these kind of events and webinars. Yeah. The conference and trade show people are really sad, probably really sad to see this. If you were still at ATD, that might be a sad stat.
But you know what it also makes me think about is that when we have to complete compliance training, I think that puts you at your desk, right? You're like, okay, I have to spend the next 50 minutes on GDPR training, or I have to spend the next 50 minutes on software training. And that's a way of, that's a type of training, very formal. But I think what we're missing here is how much learning happens outside of the office, and how we want to make that as easy as possible, so that whenever you're looking to learn something about your job, you can so easily access that on a phone or wherever you may.
Oh. Don, I think the audio is cutting out on my side. We can pop, it might be a bandwidth thing. Joy of video, right? We can maybe stop our video, and that might help.
Where are we? Hello.
Don, are you there?
I'm
I
here.
hear you now. I do. Now I hear you.
Okay. Okay.
All right. The joy
Jeff
of
and Donna video was going to help the audio, so I think we're all set now.
we're good. I think you're good, Don. Sorry about that. We did lose you when you were saying all those really amazing things.
Well, I can't even remember them, but we'll move on. Okay, so can we move on to the next slide then? Excellent. Okay, so now it's talking about, with all of this technology being incorporated into the day-to-day and being incorporated into how we learn, we need to consider how we're going to measure that and how that's having an impact on day-to-day performance and business objectives. So with what we have the luxury of working at LTG, we work with Watershed, and we have deep knowledge of the analytics that we can capture as with a learning record store. And so, Jeff, can you talk a little bit about that side of how technology is enabling us to measure the impact of that performance?
Yeah, and I'll actually move beyond just video, because I did see a comment of, hey, video is great, but there's other things out there too. So I think one of the things that we see still tons of is voice over PowerPoint, or just PowerPoints or PDFs in general that are out there, ebooks, things like that. So one of the things that technology is doing us now is to get much better insight into where people are engaging most with the content that's there. So details around not just did they complete. So completion metrics are what everyone tracks. It's, hey, I completed that, whatever that means. But actually looking into, hey, which pages of a PDF did people spend the most time on? Which pages did people come back to multiple times? Those sort of metrics and analytics that you can start to dive into now that technology is allowing us to do that are providing so much more impact of like, how is this actually working? And then taking that a step farther, if you have a learning analytics platform, and actually relating that to a business impact. So if we're talking about sales training, seeing which pieces of content people are consuming that then relate to a higher performance in sales, or tying into HR. Again, PeopleFluent has this whole talent suite of relating learning to performance reviews and performance or career progression within a company, and being able to actually relate not just completion of learning content, but I'll argue the amount of time someone goes back to learning, the amount of content they might have created that might be in there, and using those analytics to look at the performance and kind of measure that business impact of learning content.
Right, absolutely. And also, we have another poll coming up just to talk about, and I think that this is the reason I'm going to jump to that, is just to get a baseline understanding of where our audience is in terms of how they're tracking and measuring engagement right now, so that we can talk a little bit about what's happening and then where it can go. So if you all can answer that poll. And also, I'm just reading through some of the comments, and I wanted to address the fact that a lot of what we're talking about is, as Jeff said, you know, the pushing the envelope here, or pushing future, or video and TikTok and all of those things. We are not suggesting that that's where all learning goes. It's more of using that information and what people are doing in their day-to-day lives and what the younger generation is doing in order to create and share, in order to inform how we make learning decisions in the workplace, and to create a greater spectrum based on learner preference and what may be coming into the workforce, so that we're prepared for those types of behaviors. So it's not that we want to copy something like TikTok and make it a learning app. We don't want to do that. We want to pay attention to the behaviors of people who are using those apps, and pay close attention to how that may affect how they and how they want to learn. So that's more of what we're looking at. It's not just creating the same thing, but making it for the corporate learning environment. It's understanding the behaviors behind why they're choosing to use those things and why they're spending their time with those things, and how some of those behaviors can be recreated through a different learning experience.
Yeah, and I've seen that gone as far, Dawn, as like in factory working and manufacturing companies of ours that are just embracing this technology in the training room they have in the factory, that people don't have iPads or phone or devices to do this in the field or on the line, or you might not want them to, but it's starting to embrace some of this, even in some of that, like a blend of the in-person side of it. So using communal workstations, video-oriented content as opposed to just voice over PowerPoint, things like that. Those can be embraced. It doesn't have to be hyper-personalized like we're talking about. It could just be on a TV that everyone's watching, but at least is a human there that they're able to relate to, see, and build that connection and take advantage of it. So you don't have to go all in, as you said. We do have customers that are slowly getting there and embracing that in those sort of ways.
Yeah, Jeff, if you can talk, we briefly brought this up earlier in the presentation, but our work with Johnson Controls, I think, is a really good example of how long it takes to shift a culture to be more in line with some of these technologies that are affecting our day-to-day. And the reason I'm bringing that up specifically is because it is a manufacturing company. It is a very, very large company. There are factories and units all over the world. And what we were looking at with them was, how many years ago did we start the conversations about video and about sharing and creating experiences? How long ago is that?
Oh, Dawn, this is an embarrassing story on the sales side. As everyone knows in sales, you track how long opportunities, the age of an opportunity. And they rolled over 1,000 days from when we initially started talking to them to when they actually committed to rolling out the technology. I hope that's not a barometer of the rest of the market, but it was an interesting thing to think about, that it does take some while within larger organizations to kind of build the support and trust to do something different than the traditional LMS.
Right. And the reason I wanted you to say that number was because it wasn't because we were negotiating a contract. It was because they were settling in with the type of culture that they wanted to create for their learners. And they took a risk for sure by bringing this in. But now, how many hours of content do they have on there, Jeff?
Thousands of hours. I don't even know off the top of my mind, but it's growing exponentially too, which is the exciting part.
And the number of users and the number of people who are in the field who are taking video with their cell phones or smartphones and then uploading it. And then not just that, but then the number of collaborators on a piece of content. Because if someone needs something, they're able to Google it, They're able to use the platform and find out exactly where it is inside of their, what they call ULearn. And then they're able to comment and share on it. So it's really helping them perform better. And they have called it many times a just-in-time performance learning tool, because they are being so instrumental in helping people in the field with the information that they need.
All right. Yes, absolutely. Let's check out the results of this poll.
Yep.
Looks pretty evenly split. Although we probably should have had an all of the above too.
Yeah, well, we had some people who are smart enough to put in the comments that they do all of the above, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, many of these responses that we put out there are pretty much the norm and how we need to be tracking. It's more of looking at as Jeff was saying earlier, about how you measure informal learning, how you measure the way that people are behaving toward learning, and then most importantly, how you're using that information in order to create a stronger learning experience going forward. One of the examples that we've used before is that when we see a lot of commenting happening at a certain spot in a learning module, then we know one of two things. People are very interested in it, or there's probably a mistake there, and that's why people are honing in on it. But it's just a really clear example about how you can use the feedback that we're getting from learners in order to improve the learning experience. Why are so many people focused on giving a comment right at 11 minutes and 14 seconds? If we have to look into that, find out why. Is it a hot topic? Do people need more information? Was something unclear? And then you can improve upon the learning module by providing greater information. Okay, well, we are going to move now to our next slide, which is all about you. It's Q&A, and we have about 10 minutes left of our time together. And so we do have a number of questions that have come in over the past 50 minutes. And we also received some great questions in advance of the webinar from all of you who registered early. So that is all great. And Leroy, do you want to kind of look through some of those questions and start firing away?
Sure. Yes, Jeff and Dawn, we have a question from Amy that was submitted during registration. How does digital transformation support your learning culture?
Well, I mean, the first word that pops into my mind is scalability. Like, the ability to put learning into a digital format allows it to reach many more people than in a classroom. We've even seen, not just by using e-learning, but by providing transcription services, caption and transcribing, that opens up the audience even more. It breaks down barriers, because now something that Jeff just created and sent to me, I can caption and translate and send to people anywhere in the world. I mean, we always astonish people by doing that and saying, whatever language you want to see this in, we can make it happen. And it's definitely something that people are wowed by, but also think about the power of that, by being able to take something that's existing content and now being able to share it with so many more people than you did before. And that is purely a result of digital transformation.
Yeah, and Don, what was it? I think it was the Union Tank, Christian Meeker from Union Tank said he's able to do with technology what it would have taken him 25 people to do with 5 people. Was that the stat I think he published recently?
Right.
That was pretty impressive.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's that scalability angle that you benefit from digital transformation. But keep in mind, as we've said throughout this webinar, and many of you have commented on, it's super important, though, to remember that there's a collaboration and human element that you need to capture. And luckily, things like video chat and group chat, social following, social commenting, that provides for some of that, that collaboration that we miss being in the classroom. But it just has to be a proper balance of all of those things playing into one to create that strong experience.
Dawn, we had a question pop in that was about how do we maintain engagement throughout the program? And one of the simple things that always pops to mind that we always talk to people about is ask for it. Like, just in the content you're creating, take a moment and solicit the feedback and use a technology that you have to be able to pull that, whether it's a survey gizmo or survey monkey sort of thing, or just an interactive chat forum or things like that, but actually build that into the content as you're creating it, to solicit feedback and commenting in there.
Yeah, and I also think there's a lot to be said for approachability when it comes to learning, like giving people access to the experts, letting people talk to each other, creating more of a visual platform or visual playground for people to comment on and add to. All of that is what people will gravitate to because they've made some level of connection. So I would just encourage, with all learning, have connection points within the very first module so that people, one, remember it, and two, have a reason to go back to it, whether it's within that module itself or some sort of connection ability afterward. We're going to be talking about this on Tuesday, or we're going to sign you up for a chat room so that you can continue to talk about this, or here's some homework. Anything like that that gives a next step is very important in terms of pursuing that engagement.
Yep, absolutely. And then another question that just popped in was, do you put videos in your content in the LMS, or how do you distribute them for the training purposes? And I think that's where having a dedicated platform or technology that is kind of your corporate YouTube for learning becomes really important, because the LMS is a place that people fear for a lot of reasons, and it's not the place people go back to look for content. They go there when it's prescribed or assigned to them, and you want to have a place that's more welcoming and more, what's the opposite of prescribed, Dawn? That people just want to come to and be able to find the content they need.
I think that's where like casual, approachable. It needs to be something that people, when they go to it, they feel like they're being welcomed, and they're not four barriers that they have to get through in order to get what they want.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's always, I mean, we, like Jeff, we said earlier, but Jeff and I kind of live by this model, like, how do we make everything so it's 2 clicks, no more than 2 clicks away? Because once it becomes too burdensome, we lose interest. And so just making sure that things are easy for people to access. And then once they get there, they feel like that it was designed so that there's some sort of personal connection in there. There's a reason why I'm here. There's a reason why I have to do it. And I understand that reason is very important. I mean, that's what we did. All of you said, like, or 77% of you said that you start your training with onboarding. And if you're not connecting with that person by telling them, I understand why you're here, and do you understand why I'm here to help you, you're creating the purpose, the mutual relationship there. It's imperative in order to continue an engaging relationship going forward.
Absolutely.
And Jeff and Dawn, in considering time, we actually have one more question for you guys. And you actually touched on this earlier as far as learning management. We had a question from Gabriella. How can we better measure the impact of learning in leaders' performance?
Specifically with leadership, I mean, there's so much that goes into a leader. That, you know, there's articles out there about being a born leader and you just show up and you know how to do it. And then there are others that say, no, you can learn these characteristics and you can become a strong leader. I really think it depends on how you define what leadership means to your organization. What are your expectations of your leader? And once you can define those expectations, then you can start to put metrics around what that looks like. Ultimately, in my opinion, if you have strong leadership, then it allows you to have the culture that you want your company to embody. So what does that culture look like? What types of characteristics do you want to, as a company, want to be described by and want to be known for? And then have your leaders work toward living by those values and working by those values. And then you can feel the coordination within the organization and that you are supporting this culture. And then I think you can say we've gotten that much closer because our leadership supports the company or the organization that we want to be.
Well, and I think to play off that even more, and this may be obvious, but I think it's something we talk to people a lot, is the new people or lower level or entry level people that come into the company aren't going to do it unless you do it too. Like, we are what we do. And if you want that to be a cultural component of your organization, you have to do it as well. We can't just tell people to do it, or we can't just roll out a technology that allows them to do it. It needs to be led, and we need to embrace that ourselves to scrape that tape off the webcam or get called out like Dawn and I did and actually turn it on and do it. Because
I so appreciate Eric doing that, because it's true. We have to be the people that we want others to be, and that we want to surround ourselves with groups that are all aspiring to a certain level of value. And it's kind of silly, but like Jeff will call me out saying like, oh, that's a Dawn topic, or that's what Dawn talks about. But I mean, it's as simple as, I feel like, live your life by being nice. Like, if you're nice and you're considerate about what you do, it will help the next person. So when you're designing learning, think about it. Is this something I would do? If I'm pushing something out, is this something I would want to hear or read or say? Just think about those things. Give it a split second, because that helps us create experiences that others will want to be involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably a good topic to close on. I love it. I'm very passionate about that.
I think on LinkedIn yesterday, I actually saw it was like World Kindness Day. Like, what are you doing to be kind for someone? And I was like, oh, that could be a nice ending to this. I realized that was yesterday, but today we can say it's World Nice Day. So we'll leave you with be nice. And then all of your biggest challenges can be solved for the rest of the day.
Thank you, Leroy, for including us in this.
No, thank you guys so much for participating in this conversation. Considering there are a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions, within learning right now, to you guys adding clarity to this conversation is fantastic. So I truly appreciate you guys' insight. As far as the questioning, I know there were a few questions that were submitted through the chat, as well as submitted through the registration form. We will be administering a short survey to follow up on those questions, as well as a follow-up after the webinar. So again, we thank you guys for your participation. Again, I want to thank you guys, Jeff and Dawn, for participating in the Learning and Leadership webinar series. Again, everyone, if you have any questions or would like more information regarding PeopleFluent or Instilled products, please indicate your interest in the control panel. One of our consultants or our sales reps will actually contact you with more information. So once you leave today's webinar, again, you will receive a follow-up email with the webinar recording, as well as our contact details for both PeopleFluent and Instilled, in case you have any other questions or would like to learn some more information about our products and services. And again, on behalf of PeopleFluent, presenters Jeff and Dawn, on Instilled as well, we want to thank you guys so much for joining today, and have a great day for the rest of the day.
Yeah, thanks. Bye, everyone.